While no one in government is taking accountability for the post-bank scandal, some households in the Eastern Cape are barely surviving. And many households there survive on social grants, and recipients say they are kept in the dark. And we cross live to eNCA reporter Ronald Masinda. Ronald, good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us. We've heard the story so many times, and every time it just becomes more and more painful as to what's happening with the social grant recipients and when they will receive their money. What's the update?
Good afternoon, Cindy. So during the course of the morning, we've been hanging around the Mdantsane post office. This is a post office notorious for long queues, especially during the end of the month. But today, in contrast, it was anything but long in terms of the queues. A lot of the people whom we spoke to seem to have been sorted out in terms of their delayed grant payments. But one or two people that we spoke to say that they have been sent from pillar to post. Noma Kolata is a person that we followed, a 49-year-old disabled grant recipient. She has been disabled since the age of 12 and has been receiving a social grant since 2013. She says that the staff there at Mdantsane Post Office won't assist her in a need to get a social grant. She's struggling to make ends meet as it stands. We also spoke to several elderly people. One of them told us earlier that she's even struggling to find ways to get to Mdantsane as she has to travel by means of transport. She travels by 2 taxis to get there, and she now has to resort to borrowing money from loan sharks, and she's worried that how is she going to now pay the interest as well as try to find ways to feed her family who depend on her as a pensioner. But this is what the people had to say when we spoke to them earlier in isiXhosa.
Endlini ngaloku siyaphela kubencedwe ngubrother wona ngokugemali ebejophe ngayo phaa elalini ngoku ke sekusokoxeka lokho kutya ke ngoku.
Okay, just a brief summary from what Umama Kolota has said. Her issue is with a card. Her card doesn't seem to work, Tumelo, and for weeks now she's been trying to rectify the situation. She's been told at the post office that there is money in her account. She says that she doesn't know what she's going to do when she goes back home. She's been receiving a bit of assistance from a family member.
Ronald, we have a number of reporters on the ground on this particular issue since 3 weeks or so ago. Some success stories, those that have received their social grants, but there are still many that are outstanding. Were you able to engage with the post-bank employees, the staff? Are they operating? Is it business as usual? And what are they saying?
Well, today it seemed like business as usual, but people will tell you that it's a different story at the end of the month. I mean, this is a post office notorious for a lot of issues, short staff, as well as infrastructural issues. When we tried to get inside the post office, there were actually no lights, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was load shedding. So there are a lot of issues, also vandalism to this particular post office, which is also adding perhaps to the misery of those working inside that post office. But we did also hear from SASSA, and here in the province they referred us to National, and National is adamant that everyone should have had or received their monies by now. But one of the concerns for SASSA during this time is the issue of people trying to defraud them during this time. They say that people or individuals have tried to get double payments for the delay, and this has clogged up their system. But at the moment, things seem to be much better for some, but there are a lot of other challenges, not only with the delay of the funds, but also other challenges that people face, ongoing issues that have been going on for months now that people say are yet to be addressed in this province.
And when they engage with the authorities, as you're saying, again, these are perennial problems that we just seem to forget about. There's selective amnesia, and then until another crisis emerges, then there's a sharp focus on it. So what are authorities saying in their planning or engagement with National to try and resolve this issue?
Okay, so authorities throughout the province have also tried to find other ways to speed up payments, and some of these ways are done online. But I mean, as a rural province, one expects people who are living from these communities to struggle to even find internet to deal with these challenges online. So they do prefer to come to areas like Mdantsane, even though a lot of them live in rural communities where they have to travel long distances. And some of the people that we often see in these queues are people who sleep overnight, hoping to be the first in line when they are attended to at 8 o'clock in the morning when the offices open. So these are just some of the concerns on the ground by people. And I think also maybe a wake-up call for authorities to try and find other ways to get and assist people. But we do know that the other parts of the province have been assisted by SASSA in terms of people from SASSA driving to rural communities and establishing payment points where people can find easy access. But much more work still needs to be done.
And that's what we often hear, the rhetoric, even with politicians who will say, we've done so much if they give themselves a performance appraisal. But on the ground, it's not the lived experience of many South Africans. And I just want to touch on maybe the strategic development goals, you know, around these grandeur plans and programs, the National Development Plan, for example, which is supposed to halve poverty. I think 2030 is their target in reaching those goals. And in reducing poverty in itself, the instrument of social grants was introduced, but if people cannot access that, it defeats the whole purpose.
It does indeed, and although some of the people within government are seemingly trying to find ways to reach people, the reality is a lot of people will continue to struggle, will continue to suffer as they don't have access to a lot of the information that's needed to get them to get their way in getting funds and getting assistance. As you know quite well, I mean, this is a province where hunger has also become under the spotlight, given that there are cases where women have allegedly killed their children and themselves, and this is due to the ongoing suffering that people from rural communities continue to endure. So this is a point or something that I also want to bring across during the course of this weekend with the Premier engagement later this weekend when he's will be out during the Heritage celebrations, just to find out ways of how to assist people from rural communities, because the argument has always been that, you know, as politicians, they tend to be reactionary to these issues. So perhaps maybe find ways into avoiding such disasters and catastrophes from happening.
And that's exactly the comment being made, I know, with the Democratic Alliance saying that this is indicative of a government which is far removed, disconnected from what the plight of the people are. Of course, they would say that as the opposition, but nonetheless, your reaction or in terms of how the matter has been handled, the people that you had been speaking to are beneficiaries who have been affected. What is their view, Ronald?
So having spoken to one of the people who were in queue, Umamu Cynthia, she was telling me that, you know, she is so sick and tired of struggling, of suffering, that she doesn't even understand as to why she has to vote for the ANC anymore. And those are the sentiments that were shared by several other people who say that they cannot continue living this way, living in dire poverty, and that something urgently needs to be done. And we spoke to her earlier, and I hope we have a sound clip of that.
Sekuziveke ezimbini ingakhali ndaqonda uba mandizeke namhlanje namhlanje bathi mandilinde izawukhala efowunini imali amayikho.
Uzophinda ubuye ke ngokumama kusimo ukuso?
Yho, hayi ndizakhe ndihlale ndilinde bade bayenze le nto bayenzayo. Kwaukuza apha mfana ndibolekile imali zabantu, noba ndiyifumene ndizawubhatala imali zabantu.
Yeah, Ronald, as you were saying, heightened frustration, of course, and rightfully so. And we hope that the payments will be done as promises have been made. Where else are you going, or other families that you'll be engaging with, Ronald? If you can give us a sense of how far wide we are able to cover the issues in the Eastern Cape.
So because youth unemployment as well is quite rife here in the Eastern Cape, a lot of the families rely on the elderly as their breadwinners. So what we also gathered just from our engagements with the people in Mdantsane is that the elderly themselves, I mean, this is also taking a toll on their health, not being able to get this funding and also get a means to help their loved ones. But what we also understand, Cindy, is that they will try and continue going into that line in Mdantsane. It's probably the only post office available in the township, which is one of the biggest townships in the country. So people will continue going there in the hope of finally being, rescued and receiving that much needed funding. But what is even more heartbreaking, the area that we were in Mdantsane is just a stone's throw away from a shopping center, and that is where people go to shortly after receiving their money. And it was heartbreaking seeing a lady that told us, myself and my colleague Ngamantlanganiso, so that she doesn't know where her next meal will come from.
I appreciate it. Thank you, eNCA reporter Ronald Masinda out in Mdantsane in the Eastern Cape on the SASSA debacle.